like to go over a great paper on the history of early settlement in Nova Scotia by Leo J. DeVoe. And this is online. I'll try to put the link down below. But this is a great paper if you're looking to find in Nova Scotia or really in the Maritimes, which is Nova Scotia, PEI, or New Brunswick, about the French English settlement, and again with the Micmac people, the original settlers, the native Indian people of that part of Canada and northern in Maine. And so this is a great, I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but I'm just going to go through a few little parts of this I just want to just touch on here. So this first little map here, it's a nice map, shows, here's Nova Scotia of course, and the Mi'kmaq people, this is all through Nova Scotia. There's another group called the Malasite, and then you can see the names of the other native tribes that were in the States before the English settlers came. And down here in New York State, you have the Onondaga, the Cayuga, the Seneca. In Ontario area, you have the Huron and the Algonquin, and over here in the west, the Ojibwe, and down in the east, you have the Delaware and the Massachusetts, which is interesting. The Massachusetts being, of course, the state being named after that. So these were the native Indian populations, and of course, many of them were removed with the settlement of the English, especially. But the French, as I said, the French tended not to push the native people aside, but sort of basically intermarried and intermingled with them, and in a very different way than the British did, of course. And so if we go down further here in this map, further down the paper, we get a great map here of Port Royal area in 1733, and this is just after the English have sort of just started to come in here, but this gives you a really good view of the area. This is, as I said before, sorry about that. As I said before, this is, you can see here the Port Royal, which is now Annapolis Royal, is now this area of Nova Scotia. So we're talking about down in the southeast section, or sort of right across from the top of Maine and across from New Brunswick. And this is the Bay of Fundy here, and there really aren't any settlements there because it's very cold. And so the settlements were here in this area. Here is the Annapolis Valley, the southern part of the Annapolis Valley. And you can see all the names of these little towns that they had here. Of course, when they first settled here, the French settled in Port Royal. But then different families went up and this is all great farmland, so they settled. And these names of these places are not here anymore. They're all different names now throughout the valley. There you can see the names Bellevaux, Robichaud, Vincent, Rosette, Girois, there Beaupré, Herbert, Forest or Forêt. Then there's Godet and Bastarache, Hébert, Brossard, Leblanc. These are Brun. These are all very common. Doucet. These are very common Acadian names. And of course, the Acadian community really started in this area, and then they expanded all the way up through the rest of Nova Scotia, what is Nova Scotia now, into PEI and into New Brunswick, and basically on the estuaries and on the good farmland. And they were great at diking countryside, so they would reclaim where the water was. They were great at reclaiming land and of course, once they got rid of the salt water, they were with dikes, they were able to have great lush farmland. And so this was when in 1710, 1715, the English started to come in here, and of course the French were moved out. A lot of the French went down this way, down into what is now the south shore of Nova Scotia, a lot of French communities there. And because once they started being pushed out of their areas, up until until about 1750 they still stayed here, but then there was the great, deforestation. They don't call it that, but the great kicking out of the French and sending them back on ships to France in about 1750, 1755. And the English coming in here, the planters came in all through this area and settled this area. And so the names in here, if you're in this area now, there's very little remnant of any French in this part of Nova Scotia. This is, of course, the fort is a visitor center there at Port Royal or Fort Anne, which is right there now. But just interesting that that these people here had their lives and then they were gone, and a lot of them, it's very sad, but a lot of them died on the trips back to France. Probably about a third of them did not make it because of disease and shipwreck and that type of thing. And then, of course, some of them went to Louisiana and other parts of the Caribbean and eventually Louisiana, or they returned to Nova Scotia, but not to their homes here. They went to other areas of Nova Scotia. There's another great map down here that I always wanted to take a quick peek at. This is 1750. So by 1750, the English had really started to move in, and into Halifax, which is Chebucto, but they now named it Halifax, I think after Lord Halifax. And then Fort Anne, as I mentioned, and Fort Edward was built where Windsor is now. But you can see that the name of these places like Pisiquid, Grand Pre, which is still Grand Pre, Rivière au Canard, and Chesapeake is still the name here. Chesapeake is still a French, it's still named that. It's spelled slightly differently, but there still is a Chesapeake here in Nova Scotia. Le Havre, there's still Le Havre. This is now Pubnico area, and Clare and all this area. So this is all right down here. This was the main French area, but once they lost their land and when they came back, they either went up into this area here. A lot of them went into Cape Breton, some into PEI, and a lot along the South Shore and some of these smaller fishing areas in through here. You have to remember the French had a very good relationship with the English, so the French had a very good relationship with the Mi'kmaq, the native Indians, and so they had intermarried, so they were able to hide among the native, and the native population was very, as you'll see in this article, great warriors, and there was skirmishes going on for a long time with the English. It wasn't an easy, even though the conquest of the French overseas and how it affected this part, Nova Scotia. It was a long time before they really established the English settlement. So this area right here is now Lunenburg and Mahone Bay, and a beautiful area of Nova Scotia. But it's a great fishing area. But that is where the German and mainly German ancestry people came in there, and so the family names all through here are all German background. But again, back to the French names. When you're doing your family history, any records that are from the early 1700s all the way through up almost into the 1800, maybe even the early 1800s, depending on the record. But you will find the names of the French names for the places that are now English names. So, for instance, a good example is up here in Port Toulouse, which is now St. Peter's. It was also called by the French Saint-Pierre, but it's Port Toulouse. Okay, so you'll see Port Toulouse on some records, you'll see Saint-Pierre on some records, and you'll see St. Peter's on some records, but they're all the same place. And this Narishak became Arashat. Okay, so this is a native Indian name, and it became Arashat. And then beside Arashat, in here, I'd have to focus into this map, won't show it, but there's another place called the Little Arashat or West Arashat and Port Royal. But there was a place there that originally was called Acadiaville, because a lot of the people that came there came up from Grand Pre and from this area down here after the expulsion. When they settled here, they called it Acadiaville. And so this French, in the 1750s, this was still French, under the French control all through here into PE. All this area was still under French control. Ile Royale, this was called here, and Louisbourg was up here. So they didn't, during that expulsion period, which lasted from the early to mid 1750s through to about 1762, for about 6 or 7 years, they weren't as affected. They were affected here to some degree, but not as much. And a lot of them were able to. There's a lot of inlets and a lot of beautiful country here, but they were able to hide a lot of the families, the Sampsons and the Boudreaux and the LeBlanc. A lot of the families were able to hide there, and so there's a lot of those family names up in this area. It's still there's still some French-speaking people here, and it's a beautiful area of Nova Scotia. And if you were to look up slightly up here, up here you can see Louisbourg and all the way up to up this bay that it's called Bay de Espagnol, and that's Spanish Bay or whatever, and is now up in here is Sydney, Nova Scotia. And but these were all little French communities all through here, down through this a beautiful inland lake here. So that, again, for the fishing, you can see that mostly fishing here. There's not a lot of agriculture. All the agriculture was down in this area, and through this area up into here. A little bit here, but this was the primary area here. And so some of these places, Malpec and in PEI or Ile Saint Jean, there's still these places, but like Rustico, where Anna Green Gables was set up. Once the English came in there, Rustico was, it's still there, the community Rustico, and you'll see in your records, even the early French records, they'll be from Rustico or South Rustico. And up in here is a little place called Tignish, and I'm not going to deal a lot with New Brunswick, but a lot of these places are still there in New Brunswick. Petitcodiac, Memramcook, those areas are still there, whereas some of these over here, there is still a place, Jemseg, but really now this is Fredericton and this is St. John's, New Brunswick, or St. John, New Brunswick. And so it's just interesting to see that map from 1750, and then of course with the English it all changed. And up here it doesn't really show it. There's another little island, Ile de Madeleine, and that is French territory, and went back and forth, but really became French territory. There's a lot of these families, when they were moving around because of the persecution, you'll see family records from Madeleine, Ile de Madeleine, and Saint-Pierre-Miquelon that are up in these little islands up in here. And that is a good rundown of these. Like I said, very good maps, great article, well worth a read. Is way more than I can deal with on this video, but please take the time and read through it. I think you'd find it fascinating if you have family from this area. Just remember, when you're doing your family research, you are going to run into some of these names, right? Like before Halifax was, was when it was Chubut, or like I said, Port Toulouse, or Pisiquid, Cobequid. Some of the Cobequid is now Truro area. So when you see those records and you go, where the heck is that, right? And the one last thing I wanted to mention too, there's a lot of confusion. I have to change a lot of records. I do a lot of family history work in Nova Scotia. And I have to go in family search and change a lot of records, because in this area there's a place called Port Royal. And there's also this, of course, the original Port Royal, or Port Royal down here. Fort Royal, sorry. And so people get them confused, and they put their relatives as being here, but really the French weren't really here much after about 1745, 1750. So if your records are from 1780 and it says Port Royal, it is up in this area, the Port Royal, okay, not down here. And there's probably 500 to 1,000 records that are in wrong, and people assume that it's still here, but it is not. It is up here in Port Royal. So just some quick things, and like I said, please read this article, please enjoy it, and hope this helps some. Thanks.